Once again, we will be starting in just a few more moments. We're just waiting for a few more people here to filter in, but thank you very much for joining us today. Just a reminder before we begin, if you have any questions whatsoever, you could certainly enter them in the chat box that you have on your screen. Not able to hear anyone over the phone, but you could certainly submit questions, and hopefully at the end of the presentation we'll have some time for a Q&A to answer any questions anyone has. Thank you for those people that are just filtering now. My name is Daniel Cohen. I'm with Cohen Partners LLC. We're going to be starting our webinar in just a few moments here. We're waiting for a few more people just to filter in and get settled. Once again, I'm not able to hear you by phone, but if you have any questions, you could certainly send them in via your chat function. And we should be starting in just a moment here. Thank you very much for joining us today. All right, well, looks like it's about 2 o'clock now on the dot. We're going to be starting now. See a few more people are still filtering in, but we'll begin now. Our presentation hopefully will be around 25 minutes, and we'll have some Q&A at the end. Thank you for joining us. This is a webinar on cyber insurance, understanding your risk. My name is Daniel Cohen. I'm a commercial account executive with Cohen Partners LLC. We're an independent insurance brokerage. We have over 35 plus years of experience, and I'm specializing in cyber insurance products, which of course is a very hot topic today. Right now, I'm going to be talking about various coverage components of cyber liability insurance, and hopefully after the presentation you'll understand a little bit better about how your company may be affected by a cyber attack or data breach, which really has been highlighting the media this year right now and affecting so many different companies. During this presentation, you're more than welcome to submit questions, and just another reminder, I'm not able to hear you through the phone or through your speakers, and for time purposes, we're just going to be taking all questions at the end of our presentation. And before we get started here, I just want to take a quick poll, or just 2 quick polls from everybody in the audience today. We're just going to be launching that, and if you can just give me a yes or no answer to these 2 questions that should be popping up on your screen. The first question is, does anybody have general liability insurance for their business already? And people are starting to fill that out. Of course, most companies do have the general liability policy, which is the traditional business policy, which is so very important, and I'm seeing overwhelmingly most people do have this type of insurance. And now, just in contrast, how many people have cyber insurance? If you just answer yes or no quickly there. And again, overwhelmingly, most people do not have the cyber insurance coverage. Most people do, in fact, have the general liability coverage, which people are familiar with, and they feel that that's going to be protecting them through all these cyber attack instances. But the truth is, that policy is not going to be protecting you, and it's the cyber policy that you actually need. And this presentation is hopefully going to highlight the major differences between that general liability policy, which most businesses have, and a cyber policy, which almost all businesses need. And so that's basically going to be the crux of our presentation today before we get started. Here's just a quick overview before we go into everything. We're going to be talking about what is cyber insurance, and of course we're just going to break it down in these to 2 components, really. It's your third-party liability, damages from customers or outside parties, versus the first-party coverage. And what we mean by that is the direct costs to your company after a cyber attack. So A and B is really how you break down this slide on cyber insurance. Next, we're going to be talking about some key coverage elements that you should be aware of if you are purchasing the cyber insurance policy. In our second part, we're going to go over who needs cyber insurance, some focus on law firms and healthcare, but we're certainly going to talk about all business sectors. And finally, we're just going to review a few cases that your companies cannot ignore. These are just some claim scenarios about different industries, and through those examples, we're really going to try to show you how the coverage responds to those common cyber attack scenarios, and really what kind of claim scenarios are there and how are companies being breached. So in our first part, what is cyber liability insurance? And companies today are certainly witnessing more cyber attacks, and more companies are being even more perplexed as to why their traditional policy is just not affording them the coverage that they need. Well, here's the definition of cyber liability. It's essentially coverage protecting your business against third-party losses from privacy liability and network security liability and media liability. We'll talk a little bit about media liability, although this is a separate policy that a lot of companies write in conjunction with the cyber policy. But really, when we're talking about cyber liability and that first component, the third-party liability, we're either talking about a privacy breach or some network security liability. That, in essence, is really what the cyber policy is protecting you against. And we're going to go on and break that down for you as well. So from that third-party standpoint, again, we're talking about privacy liability and network security liability, and A, B, and C here are really the three common occurrences that companies witness after a cyber attack and how the cyber policy responds. It's either after a failure to prevent unauthorized breach of a data, so somebody getting into your network, your system, and getting either customer or company information. Maybe it's credit cards, maybe it's social security numbers, of course, are the two hot items. The second component is really a transmission of virus. So anybody getting into your online network, if you're doing e-commerce or maybe social media or simply have a website online, or even maybe through email, any online activities, if somebody gets into your system and releases that malicious virus that then goes to your customers or a third party, and those third parties or that customer turns around and sues you, well, the cyber policy is going to protect you. And finally, from instances from network shutdown. Of course, if somebody gets into your system and because of the overloading of your system on a network attack, and you're not able to perform some critical services, you may be held liable by your customers or third party. So A, B, and C, those are really the three common occurrences that we see in terms of cyber attacks, and the three common occurrences which the cyber policy is going to protect you against. Now, the second part here, communications and media liability, again, we're just going to go over a little bit this media liability part. It's usually in conjunction with the cyber policy. The media liability component is going to protect you against unauthorized use of advertising or slogan online, copyright infringement or plagiarism online, and slander, defamation, or libel from online activities. Again, that's very important for companies doing any kind of social media, maybe blogging, or if you have a company website. That media liability policy can be extremely important to include in conjunction with the cyber policy. So now we're just going to break down those few, that A, B, and C occurrence components that we just listed on that last slide of a network data breach, right, for privacy liability and, again, network security liability. So when we're talking about privacy liability, again, we're talking about unauthorized access to private information. And this has been the major concern for most companies. Pretty much every company carries some kind of confidential customer or company information. And unfortunately today, through cyber attacks, hackers are getting into that information, which is causing major damages. What's important to know here is that not only can the attack be online or through the network, but of course it could be a theft of either physical components, maybe papers, laptops, again, for not shredding that piece of paper, and if that gets into the wrong hands, you might have released some really important customer information that can come back and be severely damaging. So the cyber insurance policy can not only cover these online activities, but also if there's stolen papers, if there's a physical theft, stolen laptops or mobile devices. So again, the big difference in these cyber policies is knowing that if you need coverage just for your network, your online activities, or if you also need coverage for paper files, laptops, and most companies do. So that was the privacy component. And now the second part that we talk about, the network security liability, which is more towards damages stemming from your online activities. So virus transmission, maybe via your website or email. A lot of times a cyber attack happens And not only is customer information stolen, but those hackers, those perpetrators can go through your network and get to somebody else's network and cause damage that way. And again, you would be held liable for that, and the cyber policy covers you for those damages. The second part of that network security liability may be a denial of service from a network shutdown. Again, if a perpetrator gets into your network, they may be able to overload your network or corrupt your network so that nobody has access to your network. And if somebody, a customer maybe, needs some kind of information or needs to use maybe your portal, this is especially important for medical facilities and companies providing medical services. If a customer can't get to certain information when they have to, they may be able to turn around and sue you for damages. So again, that cyber policy is protecting all these occurrences from somebody getting into your network. And so those are the two basic components, that privacy liability and that network security liability. Now we're going to go over another component that's featured in the cyber policy, and it's very important to know: regulatory fines and fees, and of course legal defense costs. Well, if you're a company that's handling confidential customer information and that information is access to, well, you may be subject to certain rules and regulations from regulatory companies and agencies. If you're fined for poor record handling procedures, that could be a hefty fee, and the cyber policy would protect you in that situation. And of course, legal defense costs. I can't tell you how many times we've heard somebody who really didn't do anything wrong and did all their due diligence, did what they have to do, but yet they're being brought into some suit by a customer or a third party because of an attack to their network. Well, the cyber policy is also going to pay for these legal defense costs, which are so important. Even if you're not going to pay out any damages, which you may be liable for, those legal defense costs can certainly build up. So two other important components of the cyber policy. Here's a slide on, again, media liability, which we like to just talk about briefly because sometimes it's very good for it to be in conjunction with the cyber policy. Media liability, protecting from slander, libel, defamation, and copyright infringement. Again, it's a very important piece to companies who are doing some activity online, especially if you have a website or a blog. You may want to have that coverage. If somebody either goes on your site and releases some maybe defaming a competitor or defaming one of your customers, you may need protection for that. So it's important to note that media liability in conjunction with the cyber policy. Next, we're going to be talking about those first-party expenses. So the first slide that we showed you, really how we like to break down the cyber policy, it's either going to be in the form of third-party liability, those damages from either data being accessed, the privacy liability, or a network security liability damage. However, on this other part, the other side of the policy, which few people really know about, are really these first-party expenses. So when your network is hacked and information is stolen, not only are you going to be paying damages to third parties, but you're going to have probably a ton of direct costs to your businesses. And in a lot of cases, it's not those third-party liability damages that can add up. It's actually these direct costs to your company. And so we really like to highlight, and this is a very important slide in this presentation, these 8 components, these 8 breach expenses that we like to highlight that may be included in your cyber policy. And if you are shopping for a policy, it's extremely important that you do note these first-party coverages and you ask your broker or the company about these coverages. So from top to bottom here, these are the 8 that we like to focus on. Number 1, expenses for determining what data or identity information was accessed. This is basically cost for IT forensics. If your network gets hacked, you might need to bring in somebody to review your network, and that could be extremely costly. Number 2, notification expenses. It is mandatory in just about every state for you to release notification to your customers, helping them to understand that their information has been accessed. This process can be extremely costly and it can be very time consuming, and the insurance will pay for these notification expenses. Number 3 and 4, credit monitoring and call centers. Your customers want to know that something is being done to protect their name and their information if they do find out that their information was taken. The insurance would afford credit monitoring and call centers for your customers and would help hopefully protect them from any further damages. Number 5, business interruption. And if you think about this, if somebody accesses your network and your online capabilities, well, imagine if you don't have access to that information for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month. I mean, I know if my company, if I didn't have access to my network, I would be in serious trouble. Well, the business interruption expenses would replace that lost income over the time period for your network being down. Number 6, network restoration. You may need some kind of compensation for software having to be replaced for some of your either your cloud computing or software you have on your network that may need to be restored, and that can be very time consuming and a very costly process for you to bring in somebody, and the insurance would of course protect you in that scenario. Number 7, public relations consulting. Well, it's extremely damaging to your public image if there is a data breach or a cyber attack to your company. A lot of times, especially for bigger corporations, when word gets out, it could really affect you in the long run, and you may need to bring in somebody to help you with these public relations to help you restore that image. And finally, electronic theft. If you're dealing with accounts that can be accessed electronically, maybe bank accounts for your business, and of course if somebody gets into those accounts and either wires funds somewhere else, or if you lose that kind of information, those accounts online being accessed, you might need compensation for that, and the insurance would afford you that. So these 8 breach expenses are really important for everybody to know. I would definitely concentrate on these. The real trick is, though, the basic cyber policies aren't going to give you all or even any of these kind of first-party expenses. So it's important to also know that as you add these coverages, likely the premium is going to go up significantly. But it's very important to know what options are available to you when you are trying to figure out between 1 or 2 or a few cyber policies. So those first-party expenses. Now, those first-party expenses, those are pretty much made available to you when you see the policy. These key coverage elements we're going to go over now, they're somewhat more hidden than those 8 expenses that we just went over, and these are of course just 5 points that are also very important to note again. So what's your cyber policy doing here when you're reviewing it? Coverage for information access from a non-electronic form. This can be extremely important. Again, if you're dealing with information that's not just online through your computer system, but maybe you're dealing with a lot of paper data or maybe laptops, as we'll discuss in point 2, it's important to know how that information can be accessed. So you can buy back coverage to cover you from the use of your laptops or your mobile devices, or maybe your paper data. And of course, this is for us, I like to use our agency as an example. I know my business and a lot of businesses, we use laptops, we use mobile devices. I do have a lot of paper files. I have to know when I'm buying a cyber policy, I may need that coverage. This third point here, outsource network limit. This is extremely important. I mean, knowing about how your network operates, a lot of times people are doing cloud computing, they're outsourcing some part of your network. And again, I like to use the example of our agency. I do use a customer management system. It's provided by a third party, which stores a lot of my company information. Well, when I'm buying a cyber policy, I have to make sure that that third-party network is going to be covered as well, and not just my computer system. So again, when you see a very basic policy, you have to make sure that if you're using any kind of cloud computing, maybe a PayPal or credit card system, that you're going to be covered if that network is breached. Next, information access by an employee, the rogue employee. This could be a very important key coverage, especially if you're a bigger company or if you have employees that are handling information. The basic cyber policy isn't going to give you coverage for information access by an employee. So you certainly want to look into that, especially if employees have access to confidential information. And finally, triggers for first-party expenses, such as business income and notification expenses. Well, you want to make sure that those important first-party expenses are made available to you, and not just if there's damage being brought by a customer. If you know that somebody might have access to your network, you want to make sure that you have that insurance at hand, and you don't need a customer claiming damages for you to access compensation from your insurance policy. So again, these 5 points, these are really key elements to think about when you're reviewing your cyber policy. I would say these 5 elements, along with those 8 first-party expenses we just reviewed, are 2 very important slides and something to take away when you're reviewing that cyber policy. So that's what we have for the coverage component. There are a lot of moving parts there, but now let's go into who needs cyber liability. And this is our little checklist we like to talk about. Well, you certainly need cyber liability if you're handling any private client, company, or employee information, as we discussed. If you're using any form of internet or electronic communication, email, websites, cloud computing, file storage. I mean, those are all components that really fall under the cyber policy. And finally, if you have that traditional business liability policy. I know at the beginning of the presentation, a lot of people said that they did have that general liability policy, and a lot of people said that they didn't have that cyber policy. It's important to note that the traditional business liability policy simply will not cover you from a cyber attack. The reason being is that the general liability policy is covering you from property damage or bodily injury. Property damage, they're talking about tangible property. So they're not talking about data. Data which is considered intangible is falling under the cyber policy. It's a big misconception right now. A lot of people feel that they do have coverage, but your online network and the information that you're holding is simply not protected under that general liability policy. It's extremely important to know. A few industries that we've seen a growing demand for cyber insurance, and probably many of you have heard about breaches to healthcare facilities and law firms. Well, essentially these are 2 industries that really are on the rise in demand for cyber insurance. In healthcare, of course, you have HIPAA regulations, the amount of record handling procedures that you need through HIPAA. It's really difficult. If you do have a breach, you absolutely need to make sure that you will be indemnified for all the costs that may come your way. Law firms and financial institutions, of course, for the amount of private information that they're holding, another very key industry along with healthcare, and there is a strong focus around these 2 industries for cyber, but it's really not just focused around these 2 industries alone. I mean, it's retailers, it's manufacturers, it's restaurants. You show me the business, and I could probably tell you what their cyber exposure is, what their risk is, and that they do need a cyber policy. And that's why we really say that cyber liability is for everyone. We're seeing demand from all different industries today. Yes, healthcare and law firms are particularly on top right now for the amount of regulation around them, but we have certainly seen more and more businesses come to us with that contractual obligation to get the cyber insurance. And pretty much everyone needs it. Again, as we said, if you have that online exposure, which pretty much every business has, and if you're carrying some kind of customer information, and I don't know a lot of businesses that don't, then you're definitely going to need this kind of insurance. Now we're just going to go over a few claim examples just to wrap up. We'll do about 4 examples now. They're just going to outline some of the common cyber attacks that we've seen today, and we'll use some real-life examples as well. Well, this first case here, well, this is basically around hackers stealing confidential information. It's a network breach, and it pertains to that privacy liability aspect of the cyber policy. The example we really like to use, the real-life example, is of Sony in 2011. Sony is the perfect case because they had millions of accounts which were hacked, and probably an estimated billions in expenses. And what most people saw from this case is, of course, stolen personal information and the damages around that stolen personal information, but it's really those other expenses. And for most businesses, again, those first-party expenses that are going to build up. There was a network shutdown for Sony. Well, anytime there's a network shutdown, you're going to probably use some kind of revenue, and you're going to need that business income expense from the insurance to replace that. Then, of course, the crisis management costs. Well, crisis management costs is just another word for really what we use, another phrase, sorry, for what we use for those first-party direct damages to your business. Crisis management costs, including forensics to come in and review Sony's network, and of course, all the notification, all the notices that they had to send out to their customers, both very costly components. And again, this would have been covered under a cyber policy. The next case we're going to look at, and this is a great contrast to Sony and some of the other big media giants there. And I know a lot of people following the news who see these cyber attacks, well, usually it looks like it's a big tech giant. It's Sony, maybe LinkedIn and Yahoo, I know, were other two good examples. And a lot of people feel that when they hear about cyber insurance that it's just for those tech companies. Well, that's just not true. It's of course important for tech companies, but it's also going to be retailers, restaurants, and manufacturers like we mentioned before. And so this second case is of a retailer's network breach. And the case that we like to use for this is Hannaford Brothers Supermarkets, if anybody's familiar with them. Well, a few years ago, they actually had perpetrators who planted malware on servers on hundreds of their stores. Basically, somebody came in and placed in the malware, they logged their keystrokes, and they really didn't know about this until it was too late, until customers started to turn around and complain to Hannaford about faulty credit card charges. And that's really the problem. That's how sophisticated these hackers can be, is that you really won't know about these damages until it's too late. And usually it's not one customer or two customers. If somebody gets into your whole network, you're going to probably face a slew of damages. And what's so important with this example, outside of this being a retailer, not some tech giant, is also this is a company in-house network. And it's important to note that your in-house network is still very vulnerable. If you don't necessarily have such a huge exposure online, if you're not some online giant, it still doesn't matter. If you have that computer network in-house, it's still very susceptible to a cyber attack, and you could face major damages. The third case we're going to go over, this more pertains to, again, those crisis management, first-party costs, and I think this is also a great example, kind of opens up most companies' eyes to who's so susceptible to attack outside of those big tech giants. Well, this example is of a few Washington, D.C. restaurants. These are an elite chain of restaurants who a few years ago had stolen credit card information from payment credit card devices, PCI devices. Basically, 4 servers netted about $750,000 in credit card fraud. Again, that rogue employee who came in and just stole that information. And, you know, it's important to know this is another good example. It doesn't have to just be an online network. It could be a payment credit card device, an electronic device. And like we said, credit card devices, laptops or mobile devices, there can also be coverage afforded for those. And, you know, the cyber attack doesn't necessarily have to be something online through your computer system. And basically, it's important to note that credit card fraud, especially, or misuse of private information can really diminish your reputation. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. The restaurants, outside of suffering those $750,000 in credit card fraud, well, they probably also lost a heavy amount of income and revenue, and also their reputation was severely hurt. Well, in both these cases, the cyber insurance would not only pay to bring in a professional to handle those public relations, it would also afford, as we said, credit card monitoring and call centers for your customers. Again, those really important expenses that not a lot of people think about that could be afforded under that cyber policy. And this is our last example, our last claim scenario. And this more pertains to those regulatory fines and fees that we talked about. Again, right outside of that privacy liability and the network security liability, you also have coverage for regulatory fines and fees. And this case is, of course, a doctor's practice, which is ever so common, sustaining a network breach. Thieves basically gaining to thousands of records. Well, yeah, patients will sue for damages, and there will be coverage for those damages. However, the practice may also incur heavy legal fees and those regulatory fines and fees resulting from poor record handling procedures. There have certainly been cases where regulatory agencies have slapped firms for these poor record handling procedures, especially if you're dealing with HIPAA regulations. And of course, the cyber policy would compensate you for those legal fees and regulatory fines and fees. So I think these last four examples, they really illustrate how versatile the cyber policy can be, how much it can cover, and all these different scenarios that we're facing now with what cyber attacks can do to your company. And finally, we're just going to wrap up here just with a few quick facts. The chart on the left of your screen was taken from Symantec in 2010. They saw that cyber risk was a great concern to global enterprises, and about 42% of those enterprises, and this was 2-3 years ago, ranked it as their top concern, more than natural disasters, terrorism, and traditional crime, and this has certainly gone up over the years. And then to the right of your screen, another great resource for data breach statistics outside of Symantec is the Ponemon Institute. And Ponemon basically saw that in 2011, $214 was the average cost per record in the U.S. And I think over the last year, the new study that they did showed that that number was still around $200 per record. And I think that number is just really astonishing. I mean, if you think about how many records or customer information that you're handling within your company, if you multiply it by that number, that average number, you could really see the damage that a cyber attack can do to your company. At the time, $7.2 million was the average cost per breach, and I would tell everybody to go on to Symantec Breach Calculator, which is databreachcalculator.com, could show you maybe for your business the types of expenses that you'll be facing after a cyber attack. And that's pretty much going to wrap up the presentation. You can, of course, go to cpcyberinsurance.com. If you want more information, you could email me directly. Again, my name is Daniel Cohen. My email should be in that chat box. It's dcohen@cpinsurance.com. And now we're just going to take a few questions that were submitted to us during the presentation, and some good questions, in fact, some common questions that we see. The first question, how much is an average policy? Well, this is a little bit difficult just because the cyber policy is so variable. It basically depends it's specific to a company's operations and, of course, the size of your company. For maybe a smaller to a medium-sized company, there are premiums that go for around, I would say, $1,000 to $2,000 for those smaller companies, which again is pretty quite affordable if you think about the policy over a year, and that's an annual premium. I would say $1,000 to $2,000, but again, it's really going to depend on your operations. You know, if you're a tech company doing a lot of online activity, that policy and that premium, of course, is going to be much greater. So maybe a company operating at about $1 million in revenue a year, that's more of a tech company, they're probably looking at a premium closer to $3,000 to $5,000. And those are, I would say, small to medium-sized companies, maybe if you're dealing around $1 million in revenue. There are minimum premiums that start at about $500, but of course, this all scales up with coverage. So again, those indications that I'm kind of giving, this, you know, between $1,000 and maybe $5,000, depending on your company and operations a year, that's really for maybe like an intermediate policy, we would say. But of course, when you want to put on those important first-party coverages, it's going to increase in premium, that annual premium. But you know, of course, anybody could give us a call, and we would be more than happy to give out some indications if you would like, or quotes. Second question we have, what insurance companies do you use? This is, of course, a great question. Well, we're actually an independent agent. We do not operate directly under one company, which is what that basically means. So we have access to pretty much the premier cyber insurance carriers. So, for example, Travelers, CNA, Philadelphia, Chubb are some of our primary markets, and we have access to many more. So we're able to give you hopefully a set of options, but we certainly know the best options that are available and where companies should be placed. And if there's no other questions coming in, and those were two really good questions, I think that's just about going to wrap it up. But thank you again for attending today's webinar, and please call us if you do have the chance to schedule an appointment to review some of the coverage options. We're providing free consulting. We, of course, do a free policy analysis and free quotes. So really you have nothing to lose if you could just spare us a few minutes. We would be able to go over everything you need, and I would be more than happy to talk to anybody regarding the coverage or regarding some of the options that you may have for your company. So thank you again for joining us today, and we really look forward to working with everybody. And please do not be shy to contact us, and feel free. All right, thank you, and have a nice day.